What we try to do effectively is to suggest that for some time now we've had challenges with extrajudicial killings, and it is the view of the MSJ that we as a population ought not to be overly excited about that. One of the challenges we will face is that if those persons who are charged with upholding the law then themselves have no faith that the system will work if they bring persons in, then we've gone down a very slippery slope that we may not be able to come back from. It is very difficult to discuss, and we will get some criticisms, and we understand why, because the fact of the matter is it's difficult to discuss things like this in the environment that we're in. We're in a crisis. Crime is out of control. People are concerned about life and limb in a real way because of the level of violence that we see every day. But that being said, there really cannot be a response from the state which seems also to want to operate outside the ambit and remit of the law. And that is not to say that we do not understand and we do not respect the fact that many officers put themselves on the line every day and that they are in fact subjected to very strenuous situations. But let's look at the material facts of the matter. Like 2011, we had about 39 extrajudicial killings, right? The fact is, have we seen a commensurate reduction in the number of murders for the year? So even though we have these crimes and people are applauding when they say, well, take them out, but that take them out has not resulted in a reduction in crime, and therefore we need to sit down and we need to have a proper plan. And we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is an endorsement of street justice, and so that we have to find a way, and the police service has to find a way to regain the trust of the citizens of the country.
Now, in the opening of the law term, the Chief Justice, he actually spoke about some things that he would like to see, but he would not have been able to do by himself. And one of them definitely would be more convictions. You also have, I don't think he spoke about mediation this time around, but I'm wondering, from your view, what are some of the solutions that we can have to address this, be it short term or a little further down the road?
Well, the fact is, in our view, all the institutions have collapsed. Sometimes it's difficult for us in our environment to discuss the judiciary because they're very sensitive, but also because generally they're supposed to be independent, but independent doesn't mean above scrutiny. And the fact is that the judiciary has had some major challenges and they need fundamental reform. The police service needs fundamental reform, the prison service needs fundamental reform. So we currently have a situation where it's just under 20% detection rate. Let's say that doubles. The court has matters backed up to the extent that you have people on remand yard for 10 years, for 8 years. The prisons are overcrowded. So if we were to double the detection rate and you have more people needing to appear before the courts, our system just can't handle it. So we have to figure out how do we deal with that. One of the immediate things is that we have to identify cases that could be fast-tracked. We have seen in the past where, depending on the urgency of the matter, courts have sat through the night and so on. We have had that experience in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore it is incumbent upon us to identify a period which we will say this is our transition period. So you identify or create some temporary court environments and you run through some of these. And I'm not talking about hustling them to the point where justice is not done, but that we spend some time and focus on some matters that really ought to be dealt with expeditiously. And then we go into a complete transformation of the system, which requires dialogue. But in our view, some of the key things surround things like gun courts, mediation, reform of the prison service in terms of what it looks like and the environment that you're putting people in. A mother who steals for her children is placed in the same prison as someone who's just killed somebody. They might be in different blocks, but they're in the same environment. So we have a situation where young girls are in the women's prison. That can't be right in an environment, in a country that we claim is civilized, in a country that is 2016. So those reforms are very, very fundamental. The police service has to be reformed to be able to meet 21st century needs. And it's not about more equipment. It's about revamping how we go about things, and it's bringing them up to date and transforming from sending an officer who's been in the service for 20 years on 6 months training You have students who are coming out with masters and PhDs in criminology and so on. They ought to be incorporated in the system. And they ought to have the authority to give direction and so on. And it's a challenge in the public service with seniority versus qualification and so on. So all of those things, professionalization has to be a part of the discussion.
You're talking about having that dialogue and having things be a part of the discussion. When is a dialogue geared towards implementing, and when is it just a talk show?
All right. Well, one of these things we have now is, and as much as we say dialogue, there are reports that we are aware of from since the 70s and the 60s about transformation. And yes, and part of the challenge we have is how do we move to that question of implementation. And it really takes all of us. So the country has to be willing, has to be ready, but we also need politicians who have the political will to implement. A lot of the times that's where things stall. At the level of the politics. So you have political parties, when they're in opposition, they have position X, and when they get into government, it becomes position Y. And that really begins to affect all of us. And the more we, as a population, ignore that and move further away from the politics, because the apathy in the country is also very high. The further away we move from the politics, the more freedom and wiggle room we give the political parties to really run roughshod over us.
That the country has to be willing to take those steps. We're at a point in time where we see local government elections are coming up on the 28th of the month. MSJ has been consistent in making calls for certain changes and dealing with the system. What is the importance of speaking truth to power in this kind of way?
It's absolutely important, right? Orwell, if I could quote him, he says, in times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I think that for us, that is central, because that's how you empower people. And even when he says truth to power, even to us, internally in the party, we have those systems. So no one is above the principles of the party. And we have to inculcate that across the board. There can be no blind loyalty in this environment. And that's one of the challenges that we have, where as a support base, something becomes right, not because the principle is engaged, but because it's my party now. And therefore, my view changes based on my loyalty. And principles can't shift based on loyalty. And that's why truth has to be absolute. And we have to continue to speak truth to power. And we have to continue to have faith and trust that the population will take direction.
Why just two areas in terms of Arima and Point Fortune?
Yeah, that really is a strategic thing. We've learned from the experiences of others in the past. So you go through the books and you see ONR 1981, you see COP 2007, even ILP in the last local government election would have won 103,000 votes and had, I think it's 3 councillors to show for that. So the fact of the matter is that for parties that are emerging, it is very important for you to establish yourself and not spread yourself thinly. It's not possible, and you have to be realistic as well. I mean, people will come to you and say, yes, we want to run there, we want to run here, but you also have to recognize that for us, it's not just about the election, it's not just about voting, and it's about establishing pilots, if you will, establishing centers where we can demonstrate what that speaking truth to power can achieve for our community. And in the way that it might not be the best example, but in the way that you plant lawn grass, right, eventually it's going to spread. But we have to create centers, and we have to focus on those centers, and we have to water them and care for them. And as people begin to see from experience, people begin to have a lot more confidence and trust in the party.
Right, so I get it strategic, but what are the elements that say, okay, the strategic and wise decision, it's prudent to start here?
Right, because of work that we've done. We've done a lot of work in East-West Corridor over the last 3 years. Arima, we've been doing some work in Calvary, we've been doing some work in Tumpuna. In fact, we now have an MSJ under-19 football team coming out of Calvary. We've been working alongside another football club, semi-pro, that we're trying to revamp and re-engage. We've been working with residents on land issues on Calvary Hill, and we're going to make a breakthrough on that and very shortly. So we've identified these areas because of the extent to which we've done work already in them. And as I said, it's about focus. So we've been focusing energies in particular areas. And as we begin to see results, then we can translate those results into having communities see themselves as getting into office. It's not about putting MSJ in office, it's about them putting themselves in office, because many of us come from civil society backgrounds, and we know what can happen when you protest, you demonstrate, you create proposals, you have all these recommendations, and then it gets stuck because the politician has a different view. And so it has to be both and. It has to be a community that is well organized, a community that understands what it wants, and politicians who are prepared to take lead from the community. So a big part of what we're doing is also organizing the communities, because we see the communities as partners, right? They're not just votes, they're partners. So it is in our interest as MSJ to have these communities properly organized and well organized. So we help the Calvary community, for example, establish their village council. And that's what we're going to do throughout the East-West Corridor, and that's what we're going to do throughout the country. And that's what we've been doing in San Fernando, in Point Fortin, etc.
In terms of organizing communities, what is the role of emerging parties, as they say? Is it the party itself? Is it playing the role of spoiler? What do you see the MSJ's role as, and emerging parties in general?
Well, I think emerging parties in general have to play a role to transform the landscape. We talk about representative government, we talk about having more voices, but the systems that we have don't facilitate that. In large part, the systems that we have facilitate the two-party state. So persons will come and tell you, well, there's only space for 2, there's not space for 3, there's not space for 4. We don't see it like that. The environment requires that small parties hold their ground, but that we have to be a lot more strategic in what we do. And therefore, we have to use these elections as opportunities, because I know that the MSJ is not the only small party that is going to contest the election. And that is important for us, and important for us, not us the MSJ, but us country, because it is critical for us to have alternative voices and alternate opinions as part of the political landscape. Otherwise, we're going to do this seesaw battle, this seesaw that really hasn't pushed us forward. Let's be clear, since 1986, well, 1981 really, deceased Patrick Manning is the only person who got 2 terms in office. So it says something to you about where the population is heading. It says something to you about the fact that we're not satisfied. But if we don't create spaces for an alternative voice, then eventually we're going to put ourselves in a pressure cooker, and it's going to explode.
Brother Valentino says that the Calypsonian is the only true opposition. I'm wondering, what is your view on that, in the sense that, because you spoke to having people come into power, administration come into power, and then say, no, and it seems as though, okay, well, these things weren't so bad now that we're at the helm. Yeah,
and that's why, and I agree with him, and we're talking here, of course, the early Calypsonians like Brother Valentino himself, right? Social commentary is still alive and well, but I think that we've missed the boat in some regards, because we focus more on competition than on the social commentary, and being straight, and as you said, speaking truth to power. So we've compromised some of that to win our competition. But yes, if you go through the history, you'll find that the Calypsonians have documented, but they document, and what are they documenting? They're documenting the resilience of the people to what is happening. So the true opposition really has been a section of the society organized in an organized way. You have the trade union movement as part of that. You've had various youth councils. You've had community-based organizations. And they have, in fact, been the true opposition. And they've never held power. They've never held power. And that is what the MSJ is about. How do we put these persons who have traditionally challenged the state, regardless of who's in office, how do we put these persons who've challenged the state and who have an alternate view of what Trinidad and Tobago could be, how do we get them into office? And that is what our focus is. We're not coming to the community and imposing. We're not saying, this is the candidate that we're foisting on you. The candidates that we've identified have all come from the communities because of the work that we've been doing in the communities. And it is them putting themselves in a position to transform their space in a fundamental way.